ever wondered why some people seem to have a gift for music? Have you ever wished that you could play by ear, sing in tune, improvise and jam? You're in the right place. Time to turn those wishes into reality. Welcome to the Musicality Podcast with your host, Christopher Sutton.
Hello and welcome to the Musicality Podcast. My name's Christopher Sutton. I'm the founder and director of Musical U. And this is one in a series of episodes we're doing following up on our episode 100 celebration, where we asked 26 of our past podcast guests a particular question. What's one thing you've learned that could help people tap into their inner musicality? The answers we got back were fantastic and inspiring, and everyone on the team here really enjoyed hearing the variety of ideas and suggestions that came out in those episodes. So we decided we'd love to do some follow-up episodes on the common themes, because although each guest's answer was different and unique, there were definitely a few things that kept coming up. And so today I'm very happy to be joined by pretty much the full Musical U team. In fact, we're missing Sarah Campbell and our other resident pros, unfortunately, but we do have Stuart Hilton, Adam Liette, Andrew Bishko, and Anastasia Wojtinskaya. And I'll ask each of them to say a quick hello so you know who you'll be listening to. Stuart, why don't you kick us off?
Hello, I'm Stuart Hilton, the community conductor at Musical U. You probably see me in emails and on the member website quite a bit. My name pops up all over the place as Guitar Stu 777. Outside of Musical U, I play guitar in a few different groups and play golf and just have a good time with my wife and dogs.
Hi, my name is Adam Liette. I'm the communications manager here at Musical U, and I'm a trumpet player and a guitar player.
I'm Andrew Bishko. I am the product manager and content manager on the Musical U blog, and I play several instruments. My current most active project is playing accordion in a mariachi band with my wife.
Hi, my name is Anastasia Wojtinskaya. My last name is very difficult to pronounce, so don't even try. I am the assistant content editor at Musical U, and in my personal life, I play the piano, guitar, bass, synthesizer, and occasionally sing.
Rarely at the same time, I presume.
Always at the same time.
So that's who we've got joining us today, and we're just going to kind of talk through this topic and what jumped out at each of us when thinking about the message in the music and inspiring your listener to feel something. Depending on how you look at it, this is either a niche topic or something really fundamental and universal in music. So I'm excited to hear everyone's different perspective on it. This was something that Judy Rodman mentioned in her answer, talking about how all art, including musical expression, is about creating messages. Andy Wasserman talked about the internal treasure hunt for musical gold and looking for your own individual unique sound. We had Bill Hilton, David Wallerman, and Forrest Kinney all talking about kind of exploring improvisation and creating and finding your own message or finding something you want to express through your instrument. And Fiona Jane Weston, a cabaret expert, talked specifically about interpreting a song and how to take a piece you're working on and really ask yourself line by line, what is the message? What is the emotion? What am I trying to convey to my audience? So Stuart, why don't you start us off? How have you thought about this topic of finding the message in the music and inspiring your listener to feel something?
I have kind of a good history on this, or a good bit of history. In the 90s, I joined a Christian metal group because of the fact of wanting to have a message in the music. And that's kind of always stayed with me since that time. I guess I started seeing it in the 80s and how lyrics and other things would influence an audience and their life and decisions and all that. And it kind of brought me full circle into what I did through the 90s and even further. There was always something to the lyrics that always kind of stood out to me, to make sure, you're doing something that puts people on a good path versus a bad path or so-and-so. So I've always felt that it's had a great power. And I've seen it even in, watching other places, reading history. You read about, elections, there's always music being played before, a candidate gets up, because they're trying to create an emotion and get people riled up. And it's happened through all of it. I remember reading even Hitler, the dictators. He had, I forget what composer it was, but the music kind of was, I guess, kind of crazy, maybe like a metal band. I don't know. But they said it would rile the crowd up. And that's when he would hit the stage. As soon as they were at this peak, he would come out and he would deliver that emotional, diatribe he wanted to say. So it's meant a lot. And it even got us to go and play music. The one group I was in, we played at a homeless shelter. And I have to say, out of all the places I have ever played, that playing there probably meant the most to me than anywhere else I've ever played doing music, because you see people kind of at their life's worst moment. They're kind of at the bottom. They're trying to build up again. They've lost everything. So you kind of see these guys just coming in with their heads down and everything like that. And we play 5 or 6 songs, and you can see as they're getting into it, they start smiling. They kind of take a break from the what's going on in life, and it was always good. I always enjoyed going out and talking to them a little bit, and they were always so thankful of just getting kind of that break from their current situation. So yeah, it means quite a bit to me. Also, I was just thinking, we interviewed Dave Cousins, and I was remembering how he talked about some of the music, that they've done had effect on people. He told where he discussed some woman who was going through, she was in the hospital, had 11 electroshock therapy sessions. I'm not sure exactly what for, but I guess this woman searched him out because she had been playing their music to get her through all the music, or all the sessions. So that's pretty cool. And then they went on to also talk about weddings, and you hear that a lot. It's always neat to think, you wrote a song that's being played at weddings all the time. So, it's just kind of cool, the effect and how that can, influence people.
For sure. And I think there's kind of two sides to this topic in a way. There's the explicit message of music. And I really enjoyed interviewing Fiona Jane Weston, because she was very much about that kind of cabaret design and lyrical interpretation and so on. And I think when you have a song with lyrics, it can be fairly clear cut. This song is about falling in love. This song is about tragedy. And, that's not to say all songs are, but I think it's really interesting with this topic to think about it from both sides. What is a clear message in a song with lyrics, and what does it mean to take maybe music without lyrics, maybe music you're improvising, and try to find some way to communicate a message to your audience? Anastasia, you're someone who writes your own music as well as performing on instruments and singing. What's your perspective on this, finding the message in the music?
Well, when you're writing your own music, typically what I write, at least, and I know a lot of previous podcast guests have echoed this, is what I write is deeply dependent on how I'm feeling. So it's quite easy to communicate whatever emotion you're feeling behind the song into the music itself. And also I wanted to add something in terms of playing other people's music too and finding the message within that. I think, Christopher, it was you that brought up an interesting point about a piece that you were playing that was about a painting, and you were playing it, but it had never occurred to you to just go and look at the painting. And I found that really brilliant, and that really, really echoed with me, because I think that even for music that's not yours, you can either construct your own narrative or imagine perhaps what the piece was about, or you can do a little bit of your own research and find out what exactly was in the songwriter or composer's head when they wrote the piece. and you can go from there. It gives you a lot of really good ideas. My piano teacher used to do that with me. For example, I was playing a piece called Puck one time, and she said, okay, it's based off of this Shakespeare character. He's kind of like playful and mischievous, so play like that. And I was like, okay, brilliant. That's great. That's so helpful. Now I know the kind of feeling that the song should have. And I think you can do that for pretty much anything that you play, whether you write it yourself or not.
Yeah, and it can be a good creative exercise. You know, if you had chosen to try and play that piece as if it was all about hockey puck, you might have come up with a slightly different rendition. And, you know,
Totally.
that's we talk about a bit in our improv stuff, where you know, the idea you have in your head can express itself through various technique. What do you think on that, Andrew, as a prolific improviser?
Well, what I wanted to point out is that there's meaning in a vibration, you know, and puck is a vibration. I had some friends, they named their child Puck. It was a big mistake.
Oh, no.
Big mistake.
Oh,
He
no.
lived up to his name in not a very good way.
Mm-hmm.
Well, a useful reminder there that we do need to be careful. As Stuart was pointing out, in fact, we do need to be mindful of the message we might be communicating intentionally or inadvertently. Aside from that, Andrew, what are your thoughts on this topic? As a teacher, as a performer, you must have had to think a lot about this question of finding the message in the music.
Well, music is dynamic. It happens in the moment. When you make music, when you play a note, you can't take it back. You can't go retract it. You can't erase it. It's there and it's done and you're moving on. So every moment there's an opportunity to put meaning into your music. One of the wonderful privileges and opportunities I've had is to be a teacher. And in the process, I've learned a lot about things that I do where I can understand them and explain them. And I had an experience. I was coaching a middle school band, and they had this thing where they had about 3 repeated notes, ba ba ba. And I said, are those the same notes? Is that? And I explained to them that each one of those notes, it might have been the same pitch, but each one was different. It was a new moment in time. It was a new interaction. It was driving forward. You were moving forward into something. Bum, bum, bum. It wasn't just ba, ba, ba. And so every opportunity to put something into your music, to be present. I'm going to demonstrate. I have my Native American flute here. I'm going to play 3 notes. Okay? 3 notes. I can play them just bland. Or I could put some meaning into them. I didn't change the rhythm. I didn't change the pitches. But by using dynamics, articulation, vibrato, what have you, I don't know if you could hear. For me, it's a huge difference. And we have these opportunities to put meaning into our music every time. We talk about music. We're on this, we have 100 and plus episodes of the Musicality podcast. We have thousands of articles talking about music. And we talk about music, but we're still making music. You can't replace music with talking. There's something in music. There's something there that says things that we can't say any other way. So for me, the important thing is to be there, to be present. A lot of times we want the music to flow out of us like it's going to be this big bubbling fountain. And sometimes that happens. But many times, just as when we're speaking, we're aware of what just happened, what was just said. We're aware of where the conversation is going to. And so when we make music, having this awareness, where was I? Where am I? And where am I going? This interplay while you're thinking about the music, it makes it's so pleasurable to be there. It feels so good. It's so much fun. And your audience is going to connect with that because you're connecting with that.
Lovely. That was a beautiful demonstration. And I always love the way you talk about improvisation and creativity and musical expression. You know, we worked together on our improv modules and learning improv roadmap, and I had reaching for this way of explaining improvisation that was about this, about finding the message, about finding a way to express yourself. And I'd struggled a bit because I'm a scientist and engineer by background. And to me, on the face of it, this idea was always a little bit woo-woo. It sounded a bit pretentious, and it's a bit like I feel about modern art, where, okay, I can understand people enjoy it, but until you can do like a double-blind test where everyone agrees the same thing about the piece of art, I'm not convinced it's actually communicated what people say it does. And so as I was touching on before, I think when there are lyrics or something, it's clear-cut and there can be an obvious message. When it's instrumental music, I've always found it hard to go beyond the specifics. And what I loved about your work on that improv roadmap was you combined the specifics, which in our case, we talk about constraints and dimensions, things like rhythm and articulation and phrasing and dynamics, with this really deep idea about expressing something and about being in the moment and about finding something you're trying to use all of those specifics for. And that to me was really nice to just bring those two worlds together. And that has stayed with me as a really useful step forwards in my own thinking on what it means to communicate a message in music.
Thank you very much. And, you know, it doesn't just apply to improvisation. I have a lot of classical training, and when we're doing classical music, we play the same piece over and over and over and over and over and over again. And it's if we're doing it right, each time it's different. Each time we're discovering something new, another nuance, another articulation, another this, another that. And to carry that forward into all your music making, it just makes it so much more meaningful.
Nice. And Adam, we haven't heard from you yet, and you have I think it's fair to say, quite a different musical career than the rest of us on the team. You've had a very specific position in the US military. Can you tell us a bit about that and what it's meant to you to try and communicate a message with your music?
Absolutely. So when I first graduated university, I joined the United States Army and the band specifically. And I arrived in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, the 82nd Airborne, and I was assigned as the division bugler. So at this time, this was 2007, the war was at its peak. And we had a lot of casualties from the 82nd. The entire division, all 20,000 were deployed at the time between Iraq and Afghanistan. And it was my job to play taps at military funerals. I did this all across the country. Over about 18 months, I played right around 600 funerals for both active duty and retirees. And that experience and what I had to put in those performances, it stayed with me for a very long time. Because at its core, taps, it's a very easy, piece of music. It's only 21 notes over 4 different pitches, a concert B flat major scale in second inversion. But each note that you play has so much meaning. And I believe it's one of the most heartfelt pieces of music in the entire literature. And it's very different from when we typically think of like music motivating people and bringing joy to people. This simple, powerful piece of music is sending someone's loved one off. It's the final goodbye from a grateful nation to this service member that died in the line of duty. And just some things that really I had to, as a performer, really embraced was the performance environment. It wasn't a hall. There was no acoustics. We're playing in open cemeteries. And I always position myself behind the family. They can never see me. And that was the purpose. The bugler should never be seen. It should just be this sound in the background. But you really had to play with the acoustics of this very open field and get a feel for it, for what your sound was going to do. The tone had to be just incredibly warm. You couldn't have that typical bright tone of a trumpet. You had to just think of the warmest sound you could possibly do. Then there's nothing biological that changes that. It's entirely in your presence in the moment and how you're pushing yourself through the instrument and expressing the sorrow of that moment, all the way down to just the way you're releasing the note. Music, a lot of instruments, the note has a definitive starting point and ending point. When you're playing taps, you almost have to let each individual note kind of have its own fall off. And very, very difficult to master, but it was truly one of the most, as I look back on a career, one of the most things I'm most proud of is playing for so many funerals. And I actually played a couple of great, awesome public events, and we can link to one of them in the show notes. I played in front of, I think there were 5 million televised. It was a NASCAR race, and that did make its way onto YouTube. So I can share that one. I wouldn't share any of these very, very private moments with anyone, but that has always stuck with me, just that moment in those cemeteries.
Wow. Well, thanks for sharing that experience. That's really, moving to even hear about. And I think it's such a powerful encapsulation of what we've been talking about, that there is something ineffable about music. And you can talk about the message and mean the lyrics and the very obvious theme of a song, but you can also talk about the message and are you communicating an emotion which might be quite complex and quite sophisticated and quite dramatic even to your audience. And that's not something that's easy to put into words. On this podcast, we talk about musical expression and some of the things you can do to feel free and creative and confident in music, but there's still a bit of a gap there between knowing those skills and being able to stand up with your instrument and convey what you want to convey. And I think it's a really interesting case also because it's not improvisational. You have a lot of freedom of expression in how you perform that piece, but there is so much that you can put into it that is not about, what note will I play next? And I think that's a really useful example for listeners to think about, that, whether it's a single note or a few notes like Andrew was talking about, or it's something purely improvisational like some of our guests, Bill Hilton and David Wallerman, were talking about, or Forrest Kinney, or it's something that, the composer had an intended meaning with, like Stuart talking about Christian music and Anastasia with our own music. I think we can't afford to forget that there is a message, or there should be. And, that desire to get away from robotic playing and playing mindlessly, that's really the heart of what this podcast is all about. So I hope some of the discussion here has been interesting and provoked some new ideas for everyone listening. I think it's something that we can apply each and every day in our musical life, and the exact way it comes across in your practice and your playing is going to be different for every person, but it's something we should all, I think, have taped to our practice stand of what am I trying to get across here, not least in a performance situation where your audience is not just you and the cat. So any final thoughts before we wrap things up on this topic?
I have one to share, actually. Yeah. Something that Andrew said reminded me of something that I've kind of always kept in the back of my mind, especially when performing and also when writing, which is the simple fact that music will often mimic speech, whether it's lyrical or instrumental. So again, these things like phrasing and inflection and dynamics, these can be expressed on pretty much any instrument. And if you just think about things like breathing patterns and the start of a new sentence or a new idea, I think it can bring a lot to your music, or at the very, very, very least, prevent you from playing kind of rigidly and robotically. So that's what's always helped me both in songwriting and in playing other people's music. Just thinking in terms of maybe words and the note being the most basic unit, and, what is a phrase? What is a bar? So that's helped me a lot, for sure.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I think we talked a little bit about some of that in a previous episode on playing like singing, I think we called it. And why don't we wrap up then with a few suggestions for people? That's one really great thing people can do to experiment with expressing something through their playing. And we touched on another earlier, which is having a particular theme or character or emotion in your mind. So you, Anastasia, you had the example of Puck, where it's a very particular Shakespearean character and personality. And, you can adopt that persona, as it were, or like you were referencing that example with Mussorgsky's pictures from an exhibition where there's a vivid image of a castle. An image in your head can totally transform your playing. I think you do need to equip yourself with some what we call dimensions of musical you, some idea of what you can do to explore. I think with the singing voice, it kind of comes instinctively to us to a large extent to convey emotion. But if you're sitting down at a piano keyboard or putting a trumpet to your lips, it's a bit trickier. I don't know, Stuart, Adam, Andrew, you all play different instruments. Maybe you could share a bit about how you've explored ways you can express a message. Adam, you go ahead.
I remember when I was first learning jazz, and I had this Charlie Parker fake book, and I was trying to play Charlie Parker on the trumpet, which is just a horrible idea. It's terribly difficult, but I couldn't quite get it right. And then I had this wonderful professor. He's like, "You just got to sing it, man. You just got to sing it. That's how Charlie Parker did it. That's how we named it Bebop." And I'm like, "What?" It's like, "Yeah, bebop, bebop, bebop." I was like, "Oh." Like literally the name Bebop came from their vocalization of their melodies. So I'm not a jazz guy, but I was like, I could conceptualize the music a little better after that. And just an interesting point. Even Charlie Parker, one of the greats, his entire style was developed through vocalization of his melodies.
Nice. That's so interesting, isn't it? How that kind of bridges the gap between the two things we've been talking about. There's the very explicit singing words and there's this more ineffable instrumental thing, but you can still use your voice to kind of connect those dots and use your instinct for how to express things on your instrument. That's great. How about you, Stuart? On guitar, how do you think about this if you want to convey a certain emotion?
I guess I use different, I hadn't thought about it like that, but I mean, it's very much right. Because I go through a lot, with the one band I'm in, we sometimes will take an old song because we aren't writing originals yet, even though we would love to start getting back into that. But using different things, like, maybe I'll strum your normal first area chords, but then maybe that's not right. Maybe you want to finger pick it. Or maybe you want to do an inversion up the neck. There's also things like, there's a couple times I've actually pulled out a slide because it just seemed like, a slide would work much better here to create an emotion. And then, of course, there is the lovely word distortion to add the things and different effects, a delay, reverb. So there's a lot of different little things, but it still has to have that underlining thing. I got to see an interview with Les Paul in person once, and he made a good statement. And he said he had been with, I forget who it was, but the guy had I think it was Al Di Meola, he's a phenomenal player. But Al played him this one thing, and Les Paul said he had so many effects on it that he told Al, he's like, take all the effects off your guitar right now. And Al did. He goes, okay, now play the same thing. And Al looked at him and goes, that isn't really that great. And Les Paul's thing was like, start off with a great idea, then add the effects to it, and then it'll just bring it out even more. And it's kind of a neat way of kind of looking at that, building onto those emotions.
For sure. And I was a bit concerned when you started going down that effects route because of the road it often leads guitarists down. But I think you've hit on the key thing, which is if you start with a message or start with something that's fundamentally musically meaningful, those can really help you shape it the way you want to shape it. And that is, I think, how they should be used.
Yeah.
One thing that I began as a melody player. And so when I've gone to play rhythm instruments or accompaniment roles on the accordion or on keyboard, there's so much you can do to interact rather than just being robot playing a groove, where you're listening to the melody, you're adding dynamics. You don't have to change the notes or the rhythm of what you're playing, although that sometimes it happens. We have a recording of a older mariachi band, and they're not really that great in terms of high artistry and all that stuff. But their rhythm section breathes with the melody. And having that idea of, they come in and they come out and they breathe with the melody, and it's so beautiful to listen to. And I've added that to my rhythm and my accompaniment playing. So have always the sense, I think, that you're always playing a melody. You're always moving with that stream, whether you're playing rhythm, whether you're hitting a drum or whatever. And I think that adds so much to the musicality of a piece. It also adds so much to your interactivity and ability to play together and listen with other people.
Nice. I think you've touched on a topic there that we will have to save for another day, which is how do you approach all of this when you're collaborating, when it's not just you sitting with your instrument. And I think that's a whole different kettle of fish. But I think there's plenty there for people to take away and start applying in their own musical lives. And I'll just wrap things up with the simple kind of call to action that, if nothing else, just be asking yourself this day by day. I think that's what came across in the episode 100 roundup, the guests who mentioned this and touched on this, that, it should just be a core part of how you think about music. What is the message I'm trying to convey? What am I trying to have my listener experience? And on that note, I will wrap things up. Thank you very much, Stuart, Adam, Andrew, and Anastasia for joining me on this one. Thanks to everyone for listening, and we will see you on the next one.
Thank you for listening to the Musicality Podcast. This episode has ended, but your musical journey continues. Head over to musicalitypodcast.com, where you will find the links and resources mentioned in this episode, as well as bonus content exclusive for podcast listeners. That's musicalitypodcast.com.